Welcome Manon, my name is Tawess and today we're talking about bears. Well, in a lot of ways actually. Since the sort of course the semi-international Pride Month has started, I thought we going to talk about bears in two ways. Of course, on one hand we have this Kodiak, which is not only a bear-inspired mech, but also the totem mech of Clan Ghost Bear. But we're also going to be talking a bit about the bear movement. And if you're not aware of what the bear movement is, it is a movement within gay culture, mostly surrounding hyper-masculine male, often hairy and or rotund, but not necessarily per se, but usually a bit more chunky. And I think it's an interesting culture because of the fact that it is a good example of something being able to be both very good and very productive, but at the same time kind of counterproductive, and that there's not one single unit within the culture. Because as I assume you can guess, not only is it highly susceptible to gatekeeping, but it's also highly susceptible to outside influence. But anyway, to give a bit of history and background, it's usually accepted that the bear movement came to life in the mid-80s in San Francisco, and was one of these underground terms that just got tossed around as a cover for male-to-male contact, since it was still fairly much frowned upon. And well, most likely the phrasing comes from George Massey, I think, wrote an article for the Object in 79, a sort of jokingly who's who in the zoo, where they characterized all gay men as a type of animal. And, well, bears, of course, were in there because, the lumberjack type, big, hairy, square, the typical rugged man. And this then rolled on. It got a foothold, and out of this developed a sort of social club thing. And the problem, of course, of this comes in the whole concept of it, because a lot of it is rooted in body positivity in some ways, since it celebrates attributes not necessarily traditional Hollywood per se, not Hollywood beautiful. It's mostly a lot of body hair, facial hair, baldness, and this whole myth of that rugged outdoors man. And here is where the problem comes in. Now, I'm not going to say this is a big problem, because I haven't been part of that scene and I cannot necessarily say it's a big problem, but I have had reports of the fact that, as usual, within social groups, you have sub-factions. And there have been tensions between what a real bear is and how to best define it. Do you have to have a beard? Do you have to have a lot of body hair? What is the upper and lower boundaries for body fat, and so on and so forth? Because people being people. And a secondary problem has sort of kind of been the whole what defines a man bit. We're not going to go in much deeper into that, and it's a surprisingly much less of a problem in a lot of ways. But they're still there, and it is a bit of a problem. But at the same time, it is a great way for building self-esteem and have body acceptance in a way that is perhaps not necessarily represented otherwise. So it's a good tool in that way, and that way I think is in many ways how we have to look at these things, because the LGBTQ movement is not unified. It's not a unit. It's not a single concept, but rather is a loose collection of ideas, sometimes at war with each other, sometimes at war with itself. And in a lot of ways, the bear culture symbolizes this perfectly, because there are some really hardcore stands within there, and at the same time, there's a lot of acceptance, and many bears are very accepting in this sort of family first way, not the sort of cynical family first that has become popularized through certain movies, but more an actual family. You take people in, and that is, how should I put it? It is important to have representation. It's important to have this sort of family for all these people who do not fit into the standard image of beauty. And there are scarce and few of those from male companionship. It's really sad actually how few there are. Now, how does this tie into Battletech? It doesn't really tie into Battletech per se. Not really. It is well, actually, in a way it does connect, because I'm pretty sure that the bear movement would be very interested in the elementals, seeing how they are, from that regard, fairly similar, actually, in what is aesthetically pleasing. Elementals, of course, are the battle armor wearing clanners, and these are usually a bit bigger, very square frames, both male and female. And so there's a connection there. Now, of course, for all intents and purposes, my scratching the surface here is, of course, just that, scratching the surface, and there's a lot of depth to the subject. But I can feel it's important to talk about this, because often when you have people looking on from the outside, there's a lot of generalizations and looking at the whole movement as a singular block, a singular cube of consciousness. And there is nothing that's further from the truth. I mean, if you think that your political party is fractured, that is nothing compared to what you have here. And it's important to keep that in the back of your head, because, well, if you're gonna go around and be angry at things or throw shade at things, you have to understand that it's a lot more complex than you make it out to be, because most don't want to do that, because that defeats the whole point of being angry at a concept. But yeah, of course, there is difficulty in defining, and this is more self-identification. Of course, can be controversy around who identifies as this or that. Personally, I don't really come close to identifying anything at this, but it is still important to consider the fact that the community has both become more open and more closed, as I understand it. More open to accepting others as this, and have become less of a threat these days. Much less of a threat. But at the same time, there's still a lot of anger and insecurity that surfaces, and this insecurity do push people away. Now, of course, the Kodiak we're painting today is of course in the colors of the flag of the bear culture, because as you are probably aware at this point, most of the subcultures within the LGBTQ QAI plus, even you have to be precise about these things, have a flag that they use their representation. And then you can see on the shoulder pad we are basically painting the bear flag, which is a brown, tan, yellowish, white, grey and black. And of course the colors of the claws follow. The colors of the Kodiak itself is painted in the same color scheme, using those colors basically. Now, if you want to read more about gay culture from an inside perspective, there are plenty of sources out there, and I do actually encourage you to look into this, because it's a fairly fascinating culture on its own. And maybe we all need a bit more understanding these days, because if we don't have understanding, then what do we have? But yeah, as I mentioned, I think there's it would be an interesting overlap between the elementals of Battletech and bear culture. I mean, sure, they don't have the hair, but they have pretty much everything else. And I mean, I don't know. There, of course, would also be a deep interest considering muscle culture, which usually goes hand in hand there. There's a overlap between muscle culture and bear culture, of course, because of same values to some degrees. But yeah, that is what it is. I'm not going to go much more into this. I highly encourage that people look into it, educate themselves a bit, and understand. Subculture usually don't get that much spotlight at these times because it's a difficult culture to portray. It's not as aesthetically pleasing as a lot of others. I mean, let's face it, there is a lot more by Hollywood standard, more aesthetically pleasing groups to represent during this month. So I thought that if you put a little bit of light on it, and I'll say as an example of a culture that is both good and bad at the same time. It has issues, but also its strengths. It's not too bad. Bad is a wrong word to use, but it has issues. But at the same time, a lot of strengths. And if you should fall into the category of a bigger, hairier guy who likes guys, and most unaware of this, hopefully you look into it. Find your peeps. Because it's important to a tribe to belong to. We all need that. Now, I'm going to quickly just run down the whole painting of this mech, because it's an adventure in its own right. So this is a 3D printed mech by Soligy. And, it's just a basic base coat with some highlighting. And it's a almost cartoony highlighting, because I want to go really like punchy, almost wooden sculpturesque in the amount of edging. So that's get your minds out of the gutter, please. Thank you. Alright, by all means stay there. I don't really care per se, but yeah. And we're not going to do any washes or anything on this. I kind of like this sort of almost cartoony style that I managed to affect. So just gonna apply some silvers, and we're gonna leave it at that. This is mostly a fun, quick project. Now, if you're still here for some odd reason, God knows why, I thank you very much, and I encourage you to subscribe, to like, leave a comment, tell me that I'm wrong, if nothing else, actually. And we are moving towards my vacation, which means we have projects that we're taking care of. And yeah, if you like that sort of idea, we are going to do some odd little things with 3D modeling and 3D printing and scenery building, and well, it will be interesting. But we'll get back on that later. We still have a week left before we get there. So yeah, anyway, I'm gonna leave you now with some music and some just relaxing tunes until we are finished painting this. But until next time, stay safe, be kind, and do play fair. Bye.